Delighted that you're here this morning, and it's great to be with you. I hope you're surviving this summer heat and humidity okay, making it from week to week. We're blessed that we have a comfortable place to meet here. It's air conditioned, comfortable, and great blessing from God. To those who are viewing online, we welcome you and hope that you're well and that you will profit much from our time together this morning. If you haven't yet received a bulletin this morning, I want to encourage you to pick up one on your way out, and in that you'll find some information on an insert about the upcoming marriage seminar, October 1 through 6, and included in that is some information about Peter Ray Cole, who will be conducting that seminar. Some of you already know Brother Cole. He's very talented, very capable. And he's going to be speaking on a subject that is very, very timely, marriage. I'd like us, if we would, to consider this as a great opportunity to invite individuals who are not members of the church, friends and neighbors and maybe co-workers and others who are concerned about marriage, issues related to marriage, and what's happening to marriage in the culture. Because Brother Cole will be addressing these subjects, I think it will be of interest and it will be helpful to other than members of the church. It'll be a great opportunity. In fact, we are mailing out in the mailing routes around the church building, we're mailing out the house-to-house, heart-to-heart program. That's a publication that will actually have an article about this particular seminar coming up in the next issue. And we're inviting all of our friends in this area to join us as we study what God's Word has to say on that important subject. So keep that in your prayers and in your plans, if you would. Last week, we began a series of sermons on church growth, specifically looking at the question of what growth looks like. We pointed out that it's important to visualize growth, both on an individual and a congregational basis. So we have subtitled this, How Visionary Congregations Prepare for the Future. We want to see it. We want to visualize it. Last week we mentioned that there are dangerous times in the history of any congregation. Some of those are listed on the screen. We talked about that. We mentioned that this is an important time in the history of the central congregation and some of the exciting things that are on the horizon for us here. Of course, that poses risks and challenges that we need to be aware of. I'm certain Satan is aware of them. Certainly we need to take precautions and plan well for growth. I also gave you 5 preliminary points about growth, which we discussed in some detail last week. Not all growth is measured in numbers. Not all growth is sound growth or good growth. That it occurs at various rates. Comparisons can be misleading and unwise. And also that growth by definition involves change. We talked about those points last week. This morning, I'd like for us to move into that list of attributes, if you will, characteristics of a growing congregation. Some features that we're going to notice as we look at growing congregations and as we envision and picture growth here at Central on, not only in the present, but on into the future. What does it look like? May I suggest to you, first of all, that growth is going to very definitely involve trust, the concept of trust. And this is going to be viewed from several different angles. First of all, a growing congregation is a congregation that trusts in God explicitly. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, trust in Jehovah, Jehovah God, with all thy heart, and lean not upon thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths. That is an admonition that is repeated in substance over and over throughout the Bible. God's people, the Israelites, in their wilderness wanderings, and on into the promised land, into the land of Canaan, were told repeatedly, you must trust in God. He will direct you. Don't rely on your own military strength, although oftentimes they numbered the people. They tried to gauge how strong they were physically, militarily. God taught them that that's not the measure of true strength or success. That's not really what growth looks like. Growth is more the nurturing of the ability to trust in God, to recognize that He is in the driver's seat of our lives. I used to see a bumper sticker from time to time that said, God is my co-pilot. Maybe you have seen that bumper sticker. Maybe a better one for the Christian would be, God is my pilot. He's the one to whom I have turned over the controls. Used to be, when you took driver's education, there were some schools that had two sets of controls. Two steering wheels, two sets of brakes. And at first, the instructor was pretty heavy on the controls. But as the confidence level increased in the student, and as the instructor began to realize, this person knows what they're doing, pretty soon the instructor wasn't on the steering wheel or the brake hardly at all. In life, there are two sets of controls, so we think. We think that we have the steering wheel and the brake. Now, sometimes I'll say to Marvina, when she'll react a certain way, I'll say, how's your brake working over there? But the fact is, really, there are no controls over there. Has to be sort of a level of trust, doesn't there? In fact, in teacher and driver education nowadays, I don't even know that they put two sets of controls in a car anymore. They didn't when I took driver's ed. Now, I could not be a driving instructor, I'll just confess that. But I'll tell you this, we must be able to turn over the controls to God. We must be able to sit there and allow God to direct our path, trusting in God. Marvina's mother, whom many of you knew, Margie Whitaker, was born in a very rough part of the country in eastern Kentucky, rough in its terrain and in its lack of comforts. And in many ways, it was an extremely difficult existence. I think it is significant that when she thought back to those days when she was a little child, and we would often have conversations about those days, one phrase that her father often said that really stuck with her, and she would repeat it to me in conversation: trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord. Is it barely possible that sometimes the lack of creature comforts can work to our benefit, spiritually speaking, because we learn to trust in God? We perhaps learn that we are not in control of everything. A congregation that's going to grow is going to have to subrogate its own control, its own desires, its own opinions, and turn it over to God. We're going to have to be able to say, if not verbally, at least in our thoughts and in our actions, we're going to have to say, God is in control. The Church of Christ is the church that belongs to Christ. It's like if we were to go back into the foyer in December and pull a coat off of that rack back there or in the pew, and we'd find a name in there. This is the coat of John Smith. We would say that John Smith owns that coat. It's his. Well, the church of Christ is owned by Christ. Do we trust Christ, who is the owner of the church? Do we trust in God to direct our steps? We must be willing to turn over that level of confidence and trust to God and truly be the church of Christ. Now, second to that is the concept of trusting our spiritual leaders. You know, when the Hebrew writer penned that last chapter, he made a statement there that is very significant with regard to elderships. Verse 17 of the 13th chapter, he said, and this is in the nature of a command, it's not merely advisory, not just a suggestion. He says, obey them that have the rule over you and submit to them. Now notice the word submit. What does it mean to submit? Isn't that a little bit like the driver instructor over here turning over control? Isn't it a little bit like saying, you know what? I'm going to go along with you. I'm going to submit to your judgment in this or in whatever question it may be. I am going to submit to you as a spiritual leader in the church. Why? For they watch in behalf of your souls. They watch in behalf of your souls. I don't know about you, but I find that particular part of the verse to be very comforting. Because I recognize that there are many times in life where my vision may be obscured. My judgment may be clouded, maybe by personal circumstances. Maybe I'm a little too close to a circumstance or a situation. I appreciate somebody with a more objective view watching on my behalf. A number of years ago, my cousin and her husband were riding in an automobile up here in western Pennsylvania on a dark, foggy day. So thick up in the high mountains where they were driving that one could not see the lines on the road. And they literally had to wind the windows down. See, they didn't have buttons in those days. You wound it down. And she would look out her side and look down for the line on the road. And he would do likewise while he was steering the car. Now, I'm telling you, when you're driving a car under those circumstances, you've got to have some trust in your companion. You've got to sort of rely upon their viewpoint. Spiritual leaders, known as elders or pastors in the Bible, by which names they are variously referred, they are in that position because they have some spiritual seniority and wisdom and judgment. They're in a position to allow us to benefit from that judgment. Why? Because they are watching for us. They may be looking out the window and saying, hey, you're getting a little close on this side. Or they may say, whoa, you're getting kind of far away from the line. Let's get back. Move right. Move right. They watch in behalf of your souls. Now, if you're wondering, well, what motivation do they have to make sure that they are doing that properly? Just read the rest of the verse. They watch in behalf of your souls as they that shall give account. As they that shall give account. Yes, I remember when Brother Alan Webster was here and pictured what it may be like on the day of judgment, where elders are literally called near the throne as that congregation is called up one by one. You remember Brother so-and-so? Remember Sister so-and-so? You were watching on behalf of their souls. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter into the joys of thy Lord. Isn't that going to be a glorious occasion? But I'll tell you something. As glorious as that is, it's also very sobering, isn't it? Particularly if you're serving in the eldership. When in the better land before the bar we stand, how deeply grieved our souls may be. If any lost one there should cry in deep despair, you never mentioned him to me. You never mentioned him to me. You helped me not the light to see. You met me day by day and knew I was astray, yet never mentioned him to me. I love elders in the Lord's church. I have met with elders. I have prayed with elders. I have wept with elders. I have lost a lot of sleep with elders. It's one thing in this congregation, I don't have to worry about the fact that I'm up at some ridiculous hour because I know that at least one of the elders is up too. I love elders because they are watching in behalf of our souls. But now watch this, brethren. We've got to trust our elders. I'm not talking here primarily about physical safety. I mean, the writer says they watch in behalf of your souls. So the emphasis here has to do with soul security. That they, as they that shall give account, that they may do this with joy and not with grief, for this were unprofitable for you. You see, being an elder can be a joyful experience if each member remembers this principle. Obey them that have the rule over you and submit to them, for they watch in behalf of your soul. Somebody said, well, that's his opinion. He's old-fashioned. He don't know what he's talking. He's one of the elders. I don't really care, but I'm going to do it this way. Well, that makes an elder's job not joyful, but with grief, as he says. And that is unprofitable for you. In other words, you're not only not going to benefit from that elder's wisdom and guidance, but you're making it hard for that elder and grievous for him to do his work. Imagine a shepherd trying to shepherd a flock of sheep, and you got one or two sheep out here who just insist that they're not going to obey the shepherd. Now, fortunately, sheep have a lot more sense than people because they don't typically do that. Normally, sheep stick right with the other sheep, and they're fairly easy to guide. But this is used as an illustration, a parallel to the church. He's not talking primarily about physical safety. But I will tell you that elders are concerned about your physical safety. That's why in a church building like this, you will find cameras. I remember when we first started seeing cameras in the church building. Part of me thought that was sort of a sad thing to develop. But you know what? You can't go anywhere these days without there being cameras. I think an elder would have to be almost sticking his head in the sand not to acknowledge that. We have cameras in this building. You know what happened the very first weekend that we installed these cameras? It was Easter Sunday, as they call it. And there was a couple over here at this sheet store behind me who were confronted by a homeless man who wanted some money, and they gave him some money. But evidently it wasn't enough money because he followed them to their home right over this way. And after they were safely in their home, he's pounding on their door wanting more money. And when they came to that door, he assaulted her at her door. When the police were called and arrived, he had fled. But do you know what? There were cameras at the Central Church of Christ in Martinsburg that were able to pick that up in the distance, and they got that guy. I'm glad they did. That was the first week that we had installed these cameras. Now, does that mean that everybody is safe now? Don't worry about a thing. You can just act as reckless and careless as you want to because there's cameras. No, of course it doesn't mean that. But it means that the elders are concerned about our physical safety. I can support that. I appreciate that. Did you know that we have security in this building? That we have a deacon who is specifically tasked with safety and security. And that there are those who are literally watching for the safety and the security of those of us who are assembled here to worship God peacefully. Now, 30 years ago, I would never have dreamed that such would be necessary. I never thought that you would see a work schedule with people assigned to lead prayer and to wait on the table and to read the script and to provide security. But such is the condition in which we now live. I'm thankful for these brethren. I appreciate them. There are other security features in place, thanks to the leadership of our elders. I have known of members of the Lord's church in this congregation who felt threatened, and legitimately so for some reason, and were provided with an escort or with a security guide to get to where they needed to be. Do you trust the elders? Well, I appreciate elders thinking of things like that. Recently, the elders in the congregation decided that, like most every other organization out there, background checks would be necessary for those who were being entrusted with the care of our precious young people. Somebody says, background checks? Why are we doing that? Well, it's because our elders are concerned with the safety and the security of our children. You can't hardly get into any teaching or other responsible position nowadays with children without going through a background check. So I hope that you will look at that like, I'm sorry that it has to be, but that's the world in which we live. And I'm so thankful that we have elders who are aware of those issues and concerned for our physical security. But I said that it's not primarily about physical security. It is more importantly about spiritual safety. Folks, as important as these other things are, all of that pales in comparison to the spiritual risks in the world that we're living in. We are living at a very dangerous time in the culture. I know you don't need me to tell you that, but it's not just for young people, but it's for all people who are trying to live according to the principles of Christianity. This is a perilous time. So we have elders that are concerned with spiritual safety. They want to make sure, for example, that the sermons that are being preached here are biblical sermons. And when we're out trying to teach the lost, one of the things we say to people, and when you invite them to the services, we say, you're going to hear sermons that are based on the Bible preaching and teaching here. That may distinguish this from some other groups, because some groups have gotten pretty far away from the Bible, just to be honest with you. You may not hear a lot of Bible. Here, our elders want the sermons to be biblical. They need to be grounded and rooted in the Word of God. because we know that that is safe and dependable and reliable. So we make every effort to have Bible sermons, Bible classes. The classes into which you entrust your children when they come on Sunday mornings and on Wednesday evenings are to be biblical. It is not primarily just a time of socializing, although there is a social aspect to it. It is a Bible class. Some children, because of their particular family backgrounds and the other things that are going on in their life, they're not getting that other places. They're not getting the Bible. But they come to these Bible classes and Vacation Bible School and programs like that. They're being taught the Word of God. Why is that so important? Because our elders recognize the need for spiritual safety and guidance and security. Scriptural literature. Did you know that not every publication that is published is scriptural? So when you go out through the foyer, take a few moments, look around that round table. Stroll over there and look at the Personal Evangelism Resource Center, PERC, over there where the light is on in the corner. Look at the sound, scriptural, good quality material that's available. Go around the corner and look and browse in the church library. Our elders think, and I think rightfully so, it is important to provide good, sound teaching material to make it available and convenient to the members of the congregation. Growth opportunities, assemblies such as this, the fellowship that occurs, and other opportunities to grow in fellowship and in social maturity. The summer series that's going on Wednesday evenings right now. These are just some of the many examples. The marriage seminar that I mentioned. All of these evidence the concern that our elders have for our spiritual welfare. May I say this too, when we're talking about trusting our spiritual leaders? If you have a concern that one of the sermons was not scriptural, or one of the pieces of literature is not according to the Bible, or the Bible class is off track, or whatever the concern, if it is a valid scriptural concern, our elders want to hear about that. The elders of this congregation meet every week, barring some unforeseen circumstances, every single week. Right now it's on Tuesday mornings at 10 o'clock here at the church building. If you would like to meet with them, just let any of them know, and they'll put you on the agenda. One of the great blessings in my life, and I believe in Jonathan's life, is the privilege of attending those meetings, for many of them. And I will tell you that we see the concern on their part about spiritual matters and the spiritual health of the congregation and providing security. Before I leave this topic, as we're almost out of time, let me ask you to think about something very seriously for next week, where we, Lord willing, we'll resume at this point. Growth into the future, present and future, looks like trust. Trusting in God, trusting in our spiritual leaders, and as we're going to see also, it's going to involve trusting one another. Trust is not the same as something that comes automatically, but trust must be established. It must be earned. It must be built. Years ago, when I first started attending the East Side congregation in Baltimore, as I was beginning law school. I was asked very early on there if I would teach the teenage class. And I agreed to teach the teenage class. I noticed it was a Sunday morning class. The next week when I was teaching that teenage class, I noticed that one of the elders was sitting in on the class. And that elder sat in on that class for several weeks. Why did he do that? Well, I'm sure it is because he did not know me well, he did not know my background, and he was concerned about the spiritual welfare of those children. How would you react to that? I could have gotten angry. I could have said, well, if you don't trust me, I don't need to teach here. I'm done. But I thought about it, and I counted it a real privilege to be serving under an eldership that took their responsibility that seriously. I ended up preaching there full-time for 5 years. Elders who take their responsibility seriously. And I had to earn their trust in teaching that class. Think about for next week, if you would please, the concept of earning each other's trust. And moving forward in the growth of this congregation, how critical and crucial that is. This morning, what I have shared with you is designed to encourage all of us to look forward with vision and confidence in our God. I hope that it has perhaps encouraged you, if you're not a member of the Lord's body, to recognize some of the glory and the majesty that is there. To become a member of the Lord's church or a Christian, a person must be baptized into Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of their sins. And that is done upon a penitent faith or belief in Jesus Christ as the Son of God. If you have not done that this morning, we do not close this lesson without extending the Lord's invitation by simply saying, you can do so even now. You can give your life to Jesus Christ. He has given all for you. And the church needs you. The church is standing by ready to welcome you with open arms upon your obedience to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Are you subject to that great invitation? If so, would you, together as we